Hi, I'm Dr. Shafer, your host of Talks with Dr. Shafer. I'm a physician, mom, life coach, musician, author, and I am passionate about using storytelling as a tool to help you reclaim, reframe, and build your most beautiful future. Today, I'm so blessed and honored to be joined by Dr. Chelsie Rohrscheib. She is a neuroscientist and a sleep expert, and she is the head expert in sleep at Wesper. Thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Rohrscheib.
Oh, no, thank you so much for having me on. It's my absolute passion to come on podcasts like yours and talk about sleep and also just the brain in general. I love educating people and helping people understand the importance of sleep and how it affects their life and well-being. So again, thank you so much.
No, it is such a pleasure to have you. And you hit the nail on the head. Sleep is incredibly important. And now we understand so much more about how it's really in the top three, if not the number one, things that you can do to invest in your health and your wellness and your safety moving forward in your life. Can you tell me a little bit about the research behind the positive effects of getting good sleep?
Yeah, that's a great starting question. Um, for a really long time, most people just assumed that sleep was just a time to put your head on the pillow and kind of shut your body and brain down and get rest for 7 to 9 hours. But science has shown us that sleep is actually a very active and dynamic process. It accomplishes dozens of functions in the brain and body that don't actually occur during the day or don't occur efficiently. So if you think about it, this all makes sense, because why would we dedicate 1/3 of our life to something if it wasn't super important? And so we're more aware of these functions and what they do, and we're always discovering new functions every year or two. So just to kind of give you an overview of what some of these functions actually are and why sleep is so essential. So first and foremost, sleep is very important for repairing our brain and body. So we accumulate little micro damage over the day, usually to our DNA, cells, and tissues. And even though we're not aware of this damage, that damage all needs to be repaired to maintain health. So during the night, especially in the deeper stages of sleep, our repair systems go through and fix all of that damage. Another thing that sleep's really, really important for is for release of certain hormones. So, one big hormone that's really important for maintaining our health is called human growth hormone. And we release a massive amount of that hormone while we sleep. So super important. Oh, we also release a lot of sex hormones. If you're a woman, estrogen, progesterone. If you're a male, your androgens like testosterone. And we also repair our immune system when we sleep. So our immune system needs a lot of maintenance. It constantly needs to be updated so that it knows what organisms and viruses and bacteria and other infectious agents to fight off. Our immune system goes around our body and locates any cells that are looking a little bit questionable that may turn cancerous. And our immune system also increases its activity when we're ill, when we're sleeping. So if we do have a virus like COVID or the flu or a bacteria, when we're asleep, our immune system is turning up its activity to the max to fight off that illness for you. So
Mm-hmm.
those are a lot of processes that are happening in the body. But sleep is also super essential for maintaining the brain and also our cognitive functions as well. So, one of the more recent discoveries about sleep is that sleep acts as kind of a sewer system for the brain. So, our brain uses a ton of energy. About 1/3 of the body's energy is dedicated to the brain's activity. And when the brain uses energy, it creates a lot of waste byproducts. So, these can be things like plaques and toxic metabolites. And when we're in those deeper stages of sleep, our brain washes all of those toxic metabolites away, keeps the brain nice and clean, and that keeps the brain super functioning and healthy. And then another brain activity that sleep does is it maintains the brain in a way that helps the brain keep functioning as normal. So you can think of your brain as kind of like a computer. when you've got your computer open all day, maybe multiple days in a row, and you've got a bunch of programs going, your computer's going to get really slow and dysfunctional. And what's the best way to get your computer functioning again? Well, it's rebooting the computer, right? So sleep kind of does the same thing for our neurons. These are the communicating cells in the brain that are needed for pretty much all of the processes in the brain and body. And so that's really important. And then finally, the other big thing is your cognitive functions. So these are things like your emotional regulation, your learning and memory, your ability to focus, things like that are all processes that sleep plays a huge role on as well. So when you take all of that into consideration, when we're getting good quality sleep, all of those functions are occurring efficiently, and that helps us maintain health, especially in the long term. It reduces our risk for many chronic health conditions like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease. It improves our overall mental well-being and mental health. So our risk for certain mental health disorders like anxiety and depression is low. And it also improves our cognition. So things like your ability to focus, pay attention, learn, regulate your emotions, things like that. So there's many, many positive aspects of sleep. And that's why we need to make sleep and getting good quality sleep a high priority.
Thank you so much for that overview. It is so interesting and resonates so much with what I have learned as a neurologist. Interestingly enough, though, even in medical school before becoming a neurologist and going through residency, where we have a lot of training on sleep, in part because we do EEGs,
Mm-hmm.
and many neurologists will go on to be sleep specialists through fellowship training.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that residency in neurology, in medical school, I didn't receive a lot of training in sleep. And
Mm-hmm.
that is something, a sentiment that is echoed by many physicians, yet it is such a core, just principal part of our patients' health that we need to be addressing with them when we are helping them move towards their healthiest lifestyle. And I
Mm-hmm.
know for myself, so I was actually a musician before I ended up transitioning into medicine. And so I had this badge of honor of, I'm a singer, I don't sleep. I'm a producer, I don't sleep. And so then I went into pre-med, and then you're studying all the
Mm-hmm.
time, right? And you're working because you're a student, you have no money. So you're working 3 jobs and you're studying. Then you get into medical school, and then you are just hit by this incredible amount of information. And when I started in medical school, I would be studying all night
Mm-hmm.
long to prepare for tests because there was just an amount of information that was almost indigestible, right? You just needed
Mm-hmm.
every hour, every minute of the day to absorb it all. And I found, oh my gosh, if I actually sleep a few hours before my test, I do much better. I mean, a very statistically significant increase in my ability to perform
Mm-hmm.
well and do well on that test. But I think it's really fascinating. If you get into medical school, you're a relatively intelligent individual, right? And you've studied a lot. And I still didn't know how much sleep was an important part of my life and my success. And so I want to really drive home for people. It's okay if you have been maybe resistant to accepting the need for sleep because culturally it is such a badge of honor often for people to just push through and don't sleep. And we even shame people who prioritize their sleep as if that's a lazy thing, but it's really a really smart thing and a great investment in having a healthy and longer life.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's a lot of irony that medical students and doctors are actually pretty horrible sleepers typically, because they are literally responsible for improving people's health, yet they don't necessarily take care of their own sleep hygiene and sleep health.
Hmm.
But yeah, so sleep, we live in a society that is incredibly fast paced and stressful. And we're also trying to pack a lot in. So we're working crazy hours. We're exposed to bright lights in the home and pretty much everywhere, which is not conducive to good sleep at all. And we're also
Mhm.
trying to still fit in these things that are actually, fun for us, that bring us joy and bring us pleasure. But when you add all of those things up, it leaves very, very little room for your actual sleep. And what we
Mhm.
find is most Americans, so approximately 70% of Americans have chronic sleep issues now. And a high percentage of those Americans also have sleep disorders. So it's an epidemic in this country and oftentimes in other countries as well, especially industrialized countries in the West and a lot of countries in Asia as well just simply do not prioritize their sleep. And what we're seeing and what we're figuring out through research is this correlates to a lot of issues with chronic health problems, poor academic and work performance, lost wages. And it's actually an economic issue as well, because
Mhm.
companies lose billions of dollars a year from lost worker productivity because people are so tired. So yeah, it's a huge issue. But that's really why I do things like podcasts and media, is to help educate people about why sleep should be prioritized and how people could actually get better sleep at night.
Well, thank you for your time and for
Mm,
really championing this because it is really important and it is so impactful to even, if you impact one person's sleep, that's going to have a domino effect, as you said, because it's going to affect how they work, how they parent potentially if they're a
mhm,
parent, how they interact with others, how they drive, their safety when they're driving. I mean, it
mhm,
is huge. And the choices they make with their diet are affected by how they sleep. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And also to include end of life care. How long will that person live? What will the end of their life look like?
mhm,
Could it be different if they prioritize their sleep with regards to the ailments they're going to experience and the amount of time they'll need to be utilizing health services that they really would rather not? But once they've gotten to that point, it's hard to turn back time.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, and we frequently see people with issues that are related to a lifetime of poor sleep. So, um, I kind of touched on it earlier, but some of the problems we're consistently seeing right now are an increase of cardiovascular issues. Before we thought they were maybe related to things like smoking, which they are. They're definitely related to smoking,
Mhm.
and also poor diet and poor exercise and things like that. But we also know that sleep is also a major component to the development of these issues as well. We're also seeing a strong correlation between chronic sleep loss and certain sleep disorders with the development of cancers. So it kind of goes back to what I spoke about earlier with your body needs to sleep to repair itself. And when it's not repairing itself, your risk for developing these diseases like cancer specifically goes way up. Another thing that people don't really consider is how sleep affects things like your weight. So, sleep loss contributes to weight gain. Not only does it disrupt the hormones that control your hunger and how full you feel after you eat a meal, but people who are chronically sleep deprived tend to consume more calories, and they also tend to consume foods that are higher in sugar and fat and those not so good things that we try to avoid in food. So, your weight gain is not only more likely, but it's also harder to lose that weight if you are in a weight loss program. And
Mhm.
so, I I always like to caution people that chronically poor sleep is very similar to being a lifelong smoker or somebody who lives a very sedentary lifestyle that doesn't get a lot of exercise or somebody who has a poor diet. The effects are very, very similar. So if you are somebody who is looking to improve your health, by weight loss, exercise, diet improvement, sleep needs to be added into that program too.
Mhm.
And if you do improve all of those things, you can expect to reduce your risk for health problems, and you can also increase your life expectancy as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I like that you ended on that because what we understand is when you break down sleep into a number of hours. So not getting into the quality, which is important as well.
Hmm.
And different substances and disorders can affect the quality and your environment. But just looking at the number of hours, if you take 1 hour off of someone's sleep, that's going to significantly affect how much deep sleep they obtain, which is going to essentially age them
Hmm.
on the order of 10, 15 years. It's like their brain is much older than it actually is because they are under rested.
Right. So the average amount of sleep that adults, so this is all adults, including senior citizens, all adults need is 8 hours, but that's just the average. The
Mm.
span is 7 to 9 hours, and the specific amount of time that you personally need is highly dependent on your genetics and how efficient your brain and body is at accomplishing all those functions we spoke about earlier while you're asleep. And so we know from clinical science that every 30 minutes of sleep loss under that 7 hour mark raises your risk for these issues, and also, increases things like your age, well, your biological age,
Mm.
your neurological age, things like that. And then when you start getting under 6 hours, that's when we see that massive increase for a lot of these problematic diseases and reduced lifespan. So it's really important to be aware of how much sleep you're getting per night, but also the quality of your sleep as well, because somebody could be laying in bed for 8 hours, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're accumulating enough sleep hours, and their sleep is getting into those deeper, more restorative stages that actually accomplish those functions. So maybe you're somebody who is sleeping 8 to 9 hours a night, but if you have frequent awakenings or your sleep is very light and restless, that's also not really accomplishing much as far as those functions. So taking those into consideration is really important.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you for bringing that up. And so I want to pivot from that into something that may be important to a lot of our listeners, and I think is important to us personally as mothers. So when you are being awoken several times throughout the night because you have children,
Mhm.
what is the amount of time that you can break your sleep up into and still get restorative sleep?
So that's a really good question. And it's interesting. It's kind of just to go on a little tangent about this topic. So we as parents worry a lot about what the sleep loss is doing, especially during the early years, the baby stage where your baby is waking up multiple times a night, or the toddler stage where your child's getting out of bed, what that's actually doing to us health wise. There is some clinical evidence that the hormones that you release and the neurotransmitters that get upregulated, like oxytocin, which is your bonding love hormone, is neuroprotective to an extent. So it does kind of protect us against those years. But generally speaking, when you sleep, your sleep is divided into 4 sleep stages. So you start in a light stage, that's stage 1 non-REM sleep. You enter a second stage, stage 2 non-REM sleep, and then you enter a third stage, which is your stage 3 non-REM stage, and that's your deep, slow wave sleep where a lot of those biological functions are happening. And then you have a fourth stage called rapid movement, which is when dreaming occurs. And each stage has a purpose, but your restorative stages are primarily that third deep sleep stage and that REM stage. So you want to ensure that you're getting enough of those 2 stages specifically, and it takes time to transition into those stages.
Hmm.
What we've found is to cycle all the way through all 4 sleep stages takes about 90 minutes on average for most individual, give or take a couple minutes. So 90 minutes is just the average. You may need a little bit more time. Some people may need a little bit less time. But the goal is to make sure that when you do have a sleep bout, your sleep bout is long enough to allow you to get that full transition. So even though when you have young children, your sleep is highly fragmented, if you're still getting bouts of 90 minutes to a few hours, that's usually sufficient to actually get into those deeper, more restorative stages of sleep. Now, again, we can't expect new parents to be able to get normal sleep. That's just not going to
Mhm.
happen. But if you can work with your partner to come up with a schedule where you take turns, maybe you split the night in half. So one partner is sleeping in the first half of the night while you're doing all of the work with the baby, and then you switch off. That's usually the best way to ensure that you're accumulating enough sleep at night.
Mhm. And if you don't have a partner, if you can, sleep when the baby sleeps.
Yes, yes, absolutely follow that rule. I always said when I had my baby, I just gave up on chores completely. And I made it a huge priority to go into my bedroom, make it as dark as possible and sleep when she was sleeping. And honestly, that saved me personally.
Mhm.
I think women especially have a lot of pressure to get things done during the day when the baby's sleeping. But, you know, I would just be a lot easier on yourself and expect that you're not going to be able to accomplish anything. And really, it's just survival mode and prioritize your health.
Yeah, I love that. And that makes me think, oh, to go even farther off into this topic, if you know someone in your life that's had a baby and they agree and are amenable to this gift, I think a much better gift than 10 onesies and a pack of diapers would be I'm going to come to your house once a week
Mhm.
for the first month or two and I'm going to fold your laundry.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So you can just sleep because time is the most precious gift, as we know.
Mhm.
And sleep is incredibly precious use of our time. And when you have all of these chores and you're a single mom or you have several children and you're a working mom, all these reasons why you feel like you always have to be performing and on the go.
Mhm.
It's important to, again, take a breath and remember that investing in your sleep is investing in being a good mom.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, because I mean, think about the attention that you're going to be able to give to your children if you're sleep deprived. It just simply won't happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely invest in your sleep.
And when you are in those stages of life, when you're in school or you're working a job that has expectations of you that are maybe not human, or you're working several jobs or you have little kids, often we fall into some habits that we think may help us. So we maybe drink more caffeine throughout the day, or we drink something that we think will help us fall asleep at night. Can you tell me about the negative effects on our sleep of some of the sleep aids that people are commonly over the counter using, but they're actually strong, potent drugs?
Mhm. So, sleep aids are we don't usually advise taking sleep aids unless you absolutely have to. Over the counter drugs are a little bit more gentle than prescription medication. But the problem with sleep aids is even though they make you groggy and make it easy to fall asleep, they don't really allow your brain to transition through those four stages the way that's necessary to actually accumulate all of the good things that sleep does. So, what we tend to find is that people who take sleep aids tend to spend a little too much time in certain stages and
Hmm.
sacrifice other stages as well. So in the immediate, it feels great because you feel like I can fall asleep, I can stay asleep, I can get the amount of sleep I need. But over time, what happens is you're actually sleep depriving yourself, even though it doesn't feel like you're sleep depriving yourself. You're sleep depriving yourself because you're not getting specific stages that you need to maintain health. So
Hmm.
we always recommend that people avoid things like Benadryl or any of the other sleep aids that are advertised, like NyQuil. Certain supplements are mostly okay, like taking magnesium. Sometimes melatonin is okay, but we never recommend relying on a sleeping medication in the long term.
Hmm. And I think honestly, one of the most commonly over the counter used sleep aids in the world is a little drug that is called alcohol.
Mhm.
And people maybe fall back on some old data that's, less believed in now, because there are newer studies that show that, that glass of red wine is really more deleterious to your health than positive, right? So
Mhm.
people say, oh, it's healthy, I'll have my glass of wine at night. But what is that glass of wine that people are taking to unwind really doing to how they're sleeping at night?
So, alcohol is a sedative drug. It's a depressant. So, it acts on the areas of the brain that control things like your movement and your breathing, and also make you really sleepy. So, initially, when you drink alcohol, it is kind of like taking sleep medication. It makes you feel very drowsy. It makes you feel very tired. It makes it easier for you to fall asleep. The problem is that once you're asleep and as alcohol gets metabolized in your body by the liver, it gets broken down into completely new chemicals. And some of these chemicals go to the brain and act more like a stimulant than a depressant. So they go to the brain and they have the effect of making your sleep more fragmented, making your sleep less deep, and also they suppress REM sleep specifically. So even though initially you might be getting really deep sleep, in the second half of your night, people who drink alcohol tend to have more awakenings. They tend to have lighter sleep. And another thing that people don't think of is it also makes you go to the bathroom more often. So
Mm.
alcohol also acts as a diuretic. So people who drink and then go to bed tend to wake up frequently to urinate. And that's also very disruptive to your sleep as well. So you're not really getting the good quality sleep that you need, and you're certainly not going to accumulate the amount of sleep time. So alcohol should definitely be avoided before bed at all costs.
That's great advice. And I appreciate you running through that, because I think, a lot of people have certain beliefs about alcohol that are very deleterious to your sleep health and other parts of your health as well. But obviously today we'll just stay focused on our sleep. Another thing that people use when they are feeling tired because of a variety of reasons, their sleep is not what it should be. They get up in the morning and then the first thing they do is have a cup of coffee or potentially a cup of tea. What does that do to that night's sleep?
So everybody has a bit of a different response to caffeine. So caffeine, the way it works is it competes with another chemical in the brain called adenosine. And adenosine is responsible for making us feel sleepy and also helping us fall asleep and stay asleep. So at night, adenosine should be released by the brain and be at high levels. Caffeine, what happens is caffeine goes to the brain and it binds to the same receptor that adenosine would usually bind to, and it blocks the action of that adenosine. So caffeine essentially prevents your brain from getting sleepy, feeling tired, and also initiating sleep. So when you consume caffeine too close to bedtime, you're running the risk of just being too stimulated and not being able to sleep, even if you're absolutely exhausted. And so everybody's tolerance to caffeine is a little bit different.
Mm.
Usually, we recommend that if you are going to consume caffeine, make sure that you consume it in the first half of the day as opposed to the second half of the day. For most people, on average, it takes about 6 hours for caffeine to get out of your system and stop affecting your sleep. But for
Mm.
very, very sensitive sleepers, so people who are more prone to things like insomnia, we always recommend discontinuing caffeine much, much earlier. So anywhere from
Hmm.
8 to 10 hours before you go to bed.
Right.
And also the amount of caffeine that you drink should be taken into consideration. So a lot of beverages have a lot more caffeine than people are actually aware of.
Hmm.
Tea is reasonably low.
Hmm.
But things like coffee, certainly energy drinks are a really big problem nowadays.
Yeah.
Those are things you should definitely avoid later in the day. And
Hmm.
also making sure that there's no hidden additives in those beverages too, because there's other things in energy drinks that are also very similar to caffeine. So you're kind of double dosing on stimulants that can affect your sleep. So
Yeah.
um, it's caffeine's not necessarily a bad thing, but you have
Mhm.
to consume it in moderation, be aware of what your caffeinated drinks actually contain, and just make sure you're timing your caffeine appropriately.
Exactly, because of this thing called the half-life where,
Hmm.
after 6 hours, in most people, half of the caffeine is gone. It's been digested and eliminated by your
Hmm.
body. At 12 hours in the average person, that's when it's really completed its cycle of being gone.
Hmm.
So if you drink your coffee at 10 a.m., by 10 p.m., if you're a highly sensitive person, as you said, there is still, it's on its way out. It's not completely out. And I think most people don't realize that when they go for that 4 p.m. cup of coffee because they want to get to 8 p.m., that substance is still going to be affecting their body late into the night when they really want to be sleeping.
Hmm. And even if you're somebody who can consume caffeine and fall asleep, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get high quality, restful sleep. So people who
Hmm.
consume caffeine just tend to have lighter sleep. So they're not really getting into those deep stages that you need to feel rejuvenated the next day. So just really pay attention to that and kind of adjust your caffeine intake based on how you're sleeping and whether or not you feel restored the next day.
Yeah. And I know you working with the company that you work with on sleep diagnostics. I know in a
Mhm.
neurology clinic and a sleep clinic, it would be pretty typical to keep a log. And I think that's really helpful because when we're
Mhm.
trying to monitor how changes in our diet and our exercise and our exposure to daylight or exposure to caffeine, exposure to alcohol, as we make those changes, it's really easy to forget or confound what we experience after we make each change. So keeping a journal can be potentially a good way to monitor your response, monitor how you feel when you wake up, how many hours it was before you awoke. Did I wake up at 3 a.m. or did I make it to 5 a.m. this time?
Mhm. Yeah, especially if you're somebody who struggles with your sleep, keeping a diary is a great thing to help you better understand what habits. And this goes back to sleep hygiene. So we call all of these habits and behaviors that you do during the day and night that can affect your sleep positively or negatively. Caffeine and other substances definitely fall into that sleep hygiene bucket. So keeping a diary is excellent. Another thing you can do is there's a lot of sleep trackers that have diaries built into them. So things like your active watches, Fitbit, Garmin, things like that. Those can also be really helpful to understand how certain things affect your sleep. But being hyper aware is the first step that you can take to making those fine adjustments and making those changes to your lifestyle and behavior to start improving your sleep quality and your sleep health.
Self awareness is key to making changes in your habits and really sustaining them. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's so interesting. So we've talked about negative effects and, things that we shouldn't do at night. And one thing that when I was going through residency and talking to patients afterwards, we really focused on sleep hygiene being about what we did in the evening,
Hmm.
making sure that we were cognizant of our caffeine intake, of how much light we were taking in later in the day, of if we were using our smartphones, which were beaming light at us and telling our brain it's daytime. I always tried to tell patients, it's like, imagine you have a caveman brain
Hmm.
because for the last 100 years, we've done incredible things and we've developed so much. But our brains haven't kept up with that. Our brain doesn't really know what a cell phone is. It doesn't know I'm looking at this light source, but when I turn it off and put it on my bedside, I'm ready to sleep. Our brain does not understand that. It thinks light, awake, and I'm not going to secrete what I need to help initiate my sleep process until after that light happens. And it's going to be hours before I'm really genuinely sleepy. And then again, we may fall into, like you said, habits of using certain sleep aids or substances that actually make us feel sleepy in the moment, but are deleterious to our sleep quality over the night, and then deleterious to the quality of our lives because we're not getting the restorative sleep that we need.
Hmm. Yeah. So I think a lot of sleep experts always joke that the Industrial Revolution was one of the worst things that human beings could have done for their health because prior to the invention of electricity, we lived by the sun. So when the sun was out and it was light, that's when we were awake and doing all of our work. And then as soon as the sun started setting, it told our brain to prepare for sleep. And people would go to bed quite early and they would get really good quality sleep because there was no light pollution. There were no electronic distractions. And then they would wake to the sun again. And this is the very natural way that humans and most organisms on the planet should be sleeping. But we've taken that all away by introducing lights that are constantly on. Now we've got fluorescent lights that are really intense, electronic devices like your mobile phone and your laptop, which emit blue wave spectrum light, which is very sensitive to the sun. So that's very confusing to our internal biological clock. That's called our circadian rhythm. And we've seen a massive uptick in sleep problems because of that. Well, that's all. I mean, most people are very aware that, having lights on at night and looking at your devices is hugely problematic. But on the opposite end of the spectrum is scientists are more recently aware that getting enough sunlight exposure during the day also plays a huge role to our sleep quality as well. Because, now the problem with electricity and electronics is most of us are spending most of our time indoors. And whereas before we would be outside, we would be plowing the fields and getting that natural sun exposure. Well, that sun in the morning is responsible for telling us to be awake and energized. And it helps us regulate chemicals and hormones in our brain, like melatonin, which is really, really important for helping the brain keep time and know exactly what time of day it is. So yes, looking at electronics before bed is bad, but also not getting that sun exposure in the earlier daylight hours is also very problematic for sleep as well. And we know that people who don't get enough natural sunlight are more prone to things like insomnia, poor sleep quality, circadian rhythm disorders, depression, anxiety. So a wide range of issues.
And then those things just become a part of that vicious cycle of poor sleep
Right,
as we
right.
grasp at straws and grab maybe things that are deleterious to our sleep, they're harmful to our sleep, and we create new habits that are really counteracting our efforts to improve our sleep.
Right. So, what we're currently recommending in sleep medicine is that you try to get sunlight exposure within the first 30 minutes of awakening now. So, instead of sitting in your bed and looking at your phone or doing something else, try going outside if it's a nice day. Maybe you take your breakfast outside or you read your newspaper outside. Or if it's not a nice day, you could always sit by a window as well. That sun exposure is really going to help to tell your brain that it's time to stamp out all those chemicals and hormones that were built up while you were sleeping, help you be awake and energized. And it's also going to set you up to sleep when you actually do put your head on the pillow.
I love that. And, it really made me envision in my mind as you're saying that, okay, how do we make that a part of our routine, right? Because we can say it as many times as we want to, and it's great information, it's true. But how does someone really take an actionable step to do that? How do they form that habit in their mind? And it makes me think about dehydration. I think at this point, we've really taught people how important it is to be hydrated. Like most people are
Mhm.
incorporating being hydrated into their daily lives. And one of the first things they do in the morning is they get up and they have a glass of water.
Mhm.
Right. And so the thought that came to me is, okay, so here's our campaign. You get up and you get a glass of water, and then you get your glass of sunshine, right?
Mhm.
Because your sunshine tank is also empty. So just kind of thinking about ways that we can make it actionable and make it appealing. Like, well, you've got to go up to get your glass of water anyways. Drink it outside. Like, go stand on the porch or go step outside your apartment. And while you're drinking that water, just get some sunshine. Like, we can do that. We have to drink the water anyways. So we might as well do it while we're also helping our brain wake up.
Yeah, absolutely. And also make it a habit not to stay in bed after you wake up. So try to get up as soon as possible, because just the action of getting up and raising your heart rate is also going to help you wake up and prepare your brain and body to be energized. As far as water, that's another big one. Making sure that you are hydrating first thing in the morning is also going to help you feel more awake and ready to take on the day, and making sure that you're hydrated enough before you go to sleep as well. So
Yeah.
taking these things into consideration, and I realize that some people don't necessarily live in a place where you have good sun exposure all year round. There's
Mm,
also other things you can do to ensure that you're getting that light information into your eyes. We have sun lamps, UV lamps available that you can use. So if you live somewhere like I do in Michigan, which in the winter, it's very dark, very overcast, honestly, incredibly depressing for a good 4 to 5 months out of the year. An alternative is I keep a UV lamp and also UV glasses by my bedside. And I just flick those on in the morning during those winter months, to allow myself to get something as similar as possible to that sunlight. But yes, so consider light exposure part of your overall sleep hygiene routine, and pretty much any other thing you do during the day as well that can affect your sleep later on.
that's really interesting. And to piggyback on the light exposure in the morning, I've also read that it can actually be helpful to avoid using UV blocking lenses, using
Mhm,
sunglasses in the morning, because if you go for that walk or you go outside and you put on your sunglasses, you're not getting the full effect of the sun, getting that information to your brain. And again, sending that wake up signal so you're ready for the day. Wear them in the afternoon, protect your
mhm,
eyes, but allow your brain to get the full signal in the morning when you're first waking up. Is
mhm.
that something that you've
Yeah, yeah, and certainly don't look directly at the sun. We don't want you doing that.
Thank
um,
goodness we just had an eclipse. So I think
yeah,
everyone kind of got that message. I hope. I hope.
but yeah, you're absolutely right. So sunglasses will filter out a lot of that light information. We need that light information to enter your eyes and stimulate a nerve at the back of your eyes to tell your brain to change the way it's making those sleep hormones. Um, you it also really depends on the your eye color as well, oddly enough.
Hmm.
So some people who have brown eyes, for instance, their eyes are better at filtering light out, so they don't necessarily need to wear glasses. Some people with blue eyes, they may be very, very photosensitive to the light, and they may need to wear sunglasses to be outside,
Hmm.
and that's okay. But
Hmm.
you could sit in a shady area, for instance, or you could look down as opposed to out and up. These are all things that you can try to do, but the key message here is be around sunlight. You don't necessarily need it to be blasting your eyes, but be in a
Don't look at the
place.
sun.
Yeah, don't look at the sun, but
Don't do
be
it.
in a place where it is, light, you have some light information. So, don't, again, don't assume that you have to blast your eyes with sunlight, but be
Right.
somewhere where the sun is present. Mhm.
Right. Those are great tips. So, speaking about research and sleep, much of the globe undergoes a research experiment every spring and every fall with daylight savings time and then the reverse.
Mhm.
Um, what have we learned about how that affects our health? How many more heart attacks, accidents, and things occur around that time when many people are sleep deprived in the spring?
So this is a really controversial topic, especially for sleep experts. I would say the large majority of people in sleep medicine are very much against daylight savings time. We would prefer that it didn't exist because it has so many detrimental effects on people. Not only does it negatively impact your sleep, because when you dramatically alter your circadian rhythm, it's very hard for the brain to actually adjust to that dramatic change. We see an increase in insomnia, poor sleep quality, and then we also see things like an increase in cardiovascular issues, specifically things like heart attacks, strokes. We also see an increase in accidents, motor vehicle accidents, and workplace accidents go way up. And that's because when you have that dramatic switch, it's really hard for you to achieve the quality of sleep you need. And you're essentially causing a sudden sleep deprivation episode. It also usually takes people time to adjust to their new sleep schedule. So it's not like, you have one bad night of sleep after the time switch and then you're good to go. Most people, it can take many days to many weeks to actually adjust to that new schedule. And if you're somebody who already struggles with sleep issues, this is the worst possible scenario. So if you're somebody with insomnia and then suddenly you have to go to bed earlier or wake up later, that's a huge, huge problem. So very bad for health, very bad for children, especially. We see big effects on, academic performance. We see more mental health issues in kids, more stress, more anxiety, more health issues in children as well, more behavioral problems. So it's a big issue in America.
Yeah. Do you see any chance to move the needle on us not having this big annual? Because I understand that in the fall, it's more of a positive effect than a negative effect because you gain time. But when you lose time in the spring, as far as to how much sleep you get that night, which, by the way, I remember so much in residency because, you were actually happy to lose an hour in residency of your overnight time. Of your overnight call. So actually it was funny when you would work those days of shift, how there was such a impact on your schedule, and you were so appreciative for that 1 hour change in your sleep schedule. Or if you gained an hour of the day, you were so unappreciative of working that one extra hour. But are we moving the needle at all to try to effect a change?
At least to an extent. So I think we are doing a better job at educating people about why daylight savings time is problematic and how it actually affects people. Unfortunately, this is embedded into our culture now, and making any huge cultural change is very, very difficult without a lot of support from the government. So I doubt we're ever going to eliminate daylight savings time anytime soon. If we do, it will be at a state by state basis. So it won't likely be a national change, but it will be different states coming to their own conclusions about how problematic it is and eliminating it by themselves. There are countries in the world like Australia where not every single state has daylight savings time. So it can be done, but it's difficult, right? I think the best thing that we can do as a society right now is to help people understand how to actually tackle daylight savings time, how to prepare for it in advance. So instead of just trying to immediately switch your sleep schedule, doing a very kind of slow adjustment before it even happens, that can be by slowly adjusting your sleep time by 10 to 15 minutes every single night, making sure that you get light exposure at the appropriate times, making sure that you eat and exercise at the appropriate times. That is going to be more helpful in the short term. And then hopefully we'll see national change in the long term.
That's excellent advice. And on a similar topic, so for people who travel a lot and face jet lag, what are the tips and tools that they can use to try to help acclimate and stay healthy?
So there are certain industries where their sleep time and their wakening schedules are shifting constantly. So these are people in the medical industry, pilots, or people who work shifts. And these shifts and changes in your time zone are so detrimental that that's actually considered a sleep disorder in itself. We've added that to our sleep disorder list. It's called shift work disorder, but it also applies to people who travel out of their time zone. So what we usually recommend is, because you can't really control when you're asleep, you can instead control your sleep hygiene and the time leading up to your sleep or the time when you're sleeping. So pilots should prepare by making sure that the times that they will be awake, they know that they can predict that they'll be awake, that they start giving themselves plenty of light exposure during those hours. So let's say that you have to travel to the opposite side of the world. Maybe you're going to Japan. The weeks leading up to that traveling experience, you might try to stay awake during those hours that you will be awake in Japan, and also making sure that you get lots of light exposure. So this may include using things like the sun lamp that we were talking about earlier. There's also special glasses that you can wear that shine blue light into your eyes. So they're kind of like the opposite of UV blocking glasses. You can also change your eating. So another thing that exists on your circadian rhythm is the time you consume food. So if you plan your meals to reflect your meal time in your new time zone, that can also help you adjust your circadian rhythm. And also your exercise as well. Timing your exercise to fit that new schedule can also help send a signal to your brain that this is when I need to be awake and this is when I need to suppress all of those sleep chemicals that are actually controlling my circadian rhythm and making me feel sleepy. So, a number of things. It's easier said than done, I have to say, especially if your schedule is very erratic. Preferably, you wouldn't be in an industry that is making you sleep crazy hours and constantly changing your time zone, but that's impossible for people like pilots. So just making sure that you're really on top of your sleep hygiene is going to be key.
Those are wonderful tips. And I so appreciate you sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, and just your expertise in this field with listeners and with me today. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. To wrap up, do you have potentially 3 things that if you could convince everyone to at least try in their daily routine to lead them on the path of better sleep hygiene, what would those 3 things be?
So the first one is going to be fairly obvious, but I think it is by far the most essential thing people can do for their sleep is make sure you stick to a very consistent sleep schedule. So this means going to bed and waking up at the same time every single day, no exceptions. So this includes weekends, holidays, vacations. The reason for this is because your brain is very, very sensitive to change. And sticking to a consistent sleep schedule helps to keep your circadian rhythm extremely well regulated, which means that your brain is going to be very primed and prepared to fall asleep when your head hits the pillow. So that's number one. Number two is making sure that you get plenty of exercise, especially in the first half of the day. So exercise is good for multiple reasons. We know that you need it to maintain health and have a long, proactive, and mentally well life. But exercise is also really important for your sleep because when you exercise, you release a large amount of endorphins and also cortisol, which is your stress hormone. Cortisol, like caffeine, is very stimulating and wake promoting. So when you don't exercise during the day, you still have a lot of cortisol stored up in your body that can affect your sleep when you do go to bed. This is especially true for people who struggle with stress before bedtime or difficulty falling asleep from things like insomnia. So exercising in the first half of the day is a lot like taking a sleeping pill. So it's going to set you up for the best sleep possible.
Hmm.
And third goes back to that light stimulation. So making sure you're getting plenty of sunlight during the day, especially in those early hours when you first wake up, and minimal sunlight and electronic light at night. So make sure that you put away your electronics and dim the lights in your house at least an hour before you go to bed. Try living like somebody in colonial times where if you have to have light, use candlelight or use a really soft night light. turn off all those overhead lights, turn off all your lamps, because that's going to help your brain create melatonin and adenosine, those chemicals that you actually need to fall asleep.
And it's just much more romantic and fun. So
Yeah, it's pretty relaxing and nice. Actually, I always recommend the colonial technique. I think it's one of the best things that you can do.
I love it. And we're from Michigan, so we have Mackinac Island nearby. So if we
Yes.
need any inspiration, we just go up there. If anyone who's listening has never heard of Mackinac Island, I would highly advise you Google Mackinac Island and consider visiting, because it's an incredible experience. And it's a great way to really, if you've never experienced what colonial times were like, that's a great way to do it. And as two Michiganders, I'm
Hmm.
actually a Hoosier. I'm from Indiana originally, but I've been
Oh,
in
okay.
Michigan since 2015. So as a transplanted Michigander and Dr. Rohrscheib being a genuine Michigander, we have experience with this. I just so appreciate your insights, and I really love that much of what you shared as the to-do list, it doesn't really include too many to-don'ts. It's to
Hmm.
do. And that is
Right.
so much easier for us as humans, the way that our brains are wired, to say, I can do this. It's much harder to say, I have to cut this out. I have to make this change. That's a negative way of looking at things. But when our habits are positive changes and we frame them that way, we are much better able to digest, accept, and move forward with those changes. So, as we said earlier, so get out of bed, drink your glass of water,
Hmm.
get your sunlight, get your exercise, get moving, make sure that your diet is a healthy diet and that you're timing your meals in such a way that you are befriending your body so that it can rest the best at night. All amazing things that you can do to help improve your sleep hygiene and improve your life.
Hmm. And there's always more things that you can do. So just kind of keeping tabs on how your actions and behaviors are actually affecting your sleep can really help you better understand how to make those adjustments. And if you'd like to learn more about sleep hygiene, I highly recommend checking out the American Academy of Sleep Medicine's website. They have an amazing list. There's some really obvious things on there, and there's some not so obvious things that might surprise you. So have a look.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that resource. Are there any other resources that you want to share with listeners?
So, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine is probably the go-to, especially in the US. The Sleep Foundation is also really excellent for getting general information about sleep. There's always different societies for specific sleep disorders like insomnia and sleep apnea. You can also check those out as well.
And we didn't even touch on those today, but of course, if you are having fragmented sleep and you have, you're awakening with snoring and things, that is certainly something that you should discuss with your physician or your practitioner and work towards understanding. Obviously, Dr. Chelsie Rohrscheib works in an industry of diagnostics, and diagnostics can be an important tool to help understand why your sleep is fragmented and help you on the journey to treating that issue, because it is just so important for your general health. We're not providing medical advice here on the show, but we really, really encourage you to speak with your doctor, with your nurse practitioner or your PA, whoever it is that's in charge of helping you guide you on your health journey, to make sure that your sleep is the best that it can be, because it really significantly affects your health and your wellness and the quality of your life, as Dr. Rohrscheib has very eloquently described here today on the show.
Yes, especially if you've been struggling for a really long time and you've tried all of the things that we discussed. If nothing is working for you, then definitely talk to your doctor.
So, in your industry of sleep diagnostics, what are the common disorders that you are called upon to test for and treat?
Mhm. So there are over 80 recognized sleep disorders. Some are much more common than others. Some are so rare that I will never see them in my lifetime. But commonly, the type of sleep disorders that we test for would be things like sleep apnea, which is a sleep breathing disorder that causes individuals to stop breathing periodically while they are asleep. and disorders like insomnia, which we don't necessarily run a sleep study to test and diagnose insomnia. But we might if we suspect that there's a secondary reason causing somebody's insomnia. Some other common sleep disorders that we frequently see would be things like restless leg syndrome, narcolepsy, which is a part of the part of the hypersomnia group, which means you sleep too much. And we often see things like circadian rhythm disorders as well. So that's when your brain wants to sleep out of an unnatural period of time. So you might feel compelled to sleep during the day as opposed to sleeping at night. Um, the two most common sleep disorders, especially in America, are insomnia. Most people will have a bout of insomnia at some point in their life. Some people have chronic insomnia where they suffer with it for most of their life and they have a lot of difficulty dealing with that insomnia. And then closely behind insomnia is sleep apnea, which affects 20 to 26% of men and 10 to 11% of women.
And when you are diagnosing these patients, and let's say they are told that they need a assistive device, such as a CPAP, what is their general experience? What can they expect as patients?
So a CPAP is a device that we prescribe to sleep apnea patients, which helps them breathe at night. So it's kind of like wearing a mask. So you wear a mask that goes over your nose and sometimes over your mouth as well, and that delivers air into your upper airways to keep your airways open while you're sleeping. CPAPs do prevent the sleep apnea from occurring. It's not necessarily going to immediately improve your sleep. So what we frequently see is people with sleep apnea who've been suffering from sleep issues for many years will come in, they'll get diagnosed, they'll get prescribed this device, and they'll expect that as soon as they're using their CPAP correctly, that their sleep is going to be amazing. And while we are correcting their sleep apnea, a lot of these sleep issues are developed over many years and are not necessarily related to their sleep apnea, or their sleep apnea has caused secondary issues like insomnia. So when sleep apnea and things like insomnia overlap, that's called comisa. And what happens is that we can correct the sleep apnea, but the insomnia never really goes away. So we always recommend that you also work on your sleep hygiene. Maybe you work with a behavioral sleep medicine specialist. Along with your sleep apnea therapy, and also make sure that you're living a healthy lifestyle, because these therapies, while they will improve some aspects of your sleep disorder, they're not going to be a magic fix to all of your sleep issues.
That's wonderful advice, because I think it is misleading at times for patients, not necessarily because they've been told to expect it, but they just have this expectation. Often when they go to see their physician, they really often revere the opinion of the physician. They say, oh, they recommended this for me. It must be, a miracle, and it's going to make me feel all better. And yes, it's important for you, and it's a good thing to add to your sleep hygiene regimen, but you are still the captain of your ship of your health, and you really do need to make those investments in your sleep hygiene and in your general health, as we have highlighted throughout the episode, of things that you can do to improve your sleep hygiene and not just rely on using the device. And
Mhm,
also understand that you have potentially a sleep deficit that goes back quite a while. And it's
mhm,
almost like a college loan. You've got to pay it back. And most
mhm,
people aren't going to be able to pay that back in a night. They're going to be doing installments of better sleep regularly to pay back that sleep deficit loan until that sleep deficit has gone away. And that takes time.
mhm. Yes, exactly. So I always caution my patients that it can take months, sometimes years, to get to feel better, to improve your health, and to actually feel like you are sleeping properly.
Yep. So don't give up, just like any life change. Most of our life changes, we're looking at 1 to 2 years to really see the effects of that change in a holistic way, and just wow, step back and wow, that change really changed my life. It's not overnight. So stick with it, invest in yourself, invest in your health and in your sleep, and you will reap the benefits of it,
Mhm.
undoubtedly.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
No problem. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rohrscheib. I so appreciate you being here and sharing your wisdom and your expertise. And thank you to listeners for tuning in. We look forward to hearing from you about your comments, your insights you took from the show, and any questions you may have. And please subscribe and follow up for more episodes of Talks with Dr. Shafer. Stay safe and take care.
Thank you so much.
Everybody's lonely, but you can hold on to me, and I will try to make it right. Everyone needs something. Let me be that